Good morning, everyone. I appreciate everyone's patience this morning. I know we like to start on time, and I know we have a busy deadline day today, so we will jump right into this. At this time, I will call to order the Joint Senate and Assembly Committee Subcommittee on Human Services. If we can call roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson. Assemblywoman Dickman. Assemblyman Hafen. Here. Assemblywoman Howdigi. Here. Assemblywoman Monroe-Monreno. Here. Assemblyman Watts. Here. Assemblyman Yeager. Here. Senator Cannizzaro. Here. Senator Don Darrell-Loop. Here. Senator Severs-Gansert. Here. Senator Titus. Here. Assemblywoman Gorlow. Here. Chair Nguyen.
Here. Good morning, everyone. Again, I apologize that we are not starting on time. I know that is not what we like to see happen, and we have a huge budget closings today for the Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Public and Behavioral Health, as well as the Division of Child and Family Services. So with that, I will turn this over to staff to start with Budget 3162, Northern Nevada Adult Mental Health Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tiffany Greenemeyer for the record. There are 9 public and behavioral health budgets that will be closing today. 2 are staff closing. 7 of the budgets that were heard on the March 9th, 2023 hearing. So starting on page 3 of your closing packet is Northern Nevada Adult Mental Health Service budget account 3162. There is 2 major closings in this budget. The first one is the position elimination due to outpatient caseload changes. And so the governor recommends the elimination of 5 vacant full-time psychiatric caseworker 2 positions and 1 vacant full-time psychiatric nurse 2 position due to a projected decrease in caseloads for outpatient service coordination, mental health courts, and outpatient assessment services. So moving on to page 5, on March 24th, 2023, the agency provided an updated caseload projection. And with the updated caseload projections, indicated elimination of only 3 psychiatric caseworker positions, rather than the governor's recommended to eliminate 5 positions. The revised caseload and staffing changes indicate general fund reductions of $443,524 over the 23-25 biennium. And this is in Decision Unit M202. So the other caseload is in Decision Unit M203. According to the updated caseload data, the medication clinic is projecting an increase in average caseload in comparison with the caseload projections submitted in the governor's recommended budget. Therefore, fiscal staff recommends not approving M203 and thereby retaining the existing psychiatric nurse position. So moving on to page 6 at the top is the decision for the subcommittee. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of updated March 2023 caseload projections of $443,524 in general fund reductions over the 2023-25 biennium, including eliminating 3 vacant psychiatric caseworker positions in Decision Unit M202? And does the subcommittee wish to recommend not approving Decision Unit M203, thereby retaining 1 existing psychiatric nurse position?
I'd entertain a motion. Oh, wait. Is there any further discussion about this or questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I so move.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Moving on to major issue number 2 on page 6 is new Appropriation Act language. The governor recommends including new language in the Appropriations Act to allow the agency to transfer general fund appropriations between the budgets that fund the 3 behavioral health 24/7 facilities. The decision for the subcommittee, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to include new language in the 2023 Appropriations Act to allow the agency to transfer general fund appropriations between the budgets that fund the 3 behavioral health 24/7 facilities with the approval of the interim finance committee upon recommendation of the governor?
Any other questions about that? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I move.
Second?
Any other further discussions? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes.
So moving on, other closing items, 1 through 12 in this budget. Other closing item number 10 and 11 are transfer out Building 8 and transfer out Building 8A. Fiscal staff recommends not approving decision unit E901 due to the budgeting error and recommends a technical adjustment to remove the base of expenditures of $34,182 over the biennium in the utilities category associated with Building 8. To ensure there is consideration of funding the expenditures, a separate decision point for a direct general fund appropriation will be presented in the ADSD Sierra Regional Center budget closing. And with other closing item 11, fiscal staff recommends not approving expenditures of $17,612 over the biennium in the utilities category associated with Building 8A. So this was due to, E903 was due to the same thing as a budgeting error, so the recommendation is not to approve E903. And there will be a separate general fund appropriation will be presented in the DCFS Northern Nevada Child and Adolescent Service budget closing. And then on other closing item 12, this is a divisional cost allocation correction. As noted in the closing document for the Office of Health Administration budget, which was closed by the subcommittees on April 7th, 2023, the Division of Public and Behavioral Health discovered an errors in the cost allocation calculation, including the executive budget. According to the agency, although it requested a budget amendment in February of 2023, the Governor's Finance Office did not submit a budget amendment to correct the errors. Fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to the base budget and decision unit E802, requiring additional general fund appropriations totaling $625,159 over the 2023-25 biennium, as shown in the adjustment section at the bottom of the document. This division cost allocation affects 3 other accounts, just so you guys are aware. Moving on to page 8, at the top is the fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 9 be closed as recommended by the governor, that decision units E901 and E903 and other closing items 10 and 11 not be approved, that the technical adjustments to the base budget in other closing items 10 and 11 be approved, and other closing item 12 be closed with the noted technical adjustments, and requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries. If we can move on to the next budget, 63161.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. Moving on to page 11 is Southern Nevada Adult Mental Health Services, 3161. And then moving on to page 12, there are four major closing issues in this budget. The first major closing issue is Stein Forensic Facility, position changes and new positions. The governor recommends converting 12 intermittent temporary forensic specialists, 3 positions, to permanent full-time state positions and contract costs for support of housing clients, and fund it with $2.4 million in general fund appropriations over the 2023-25 biennium. The governor also recommends $922,548 in general fund appropriations over the 2023-25 biennium for a licensed psychologist position and a contract forensic psychiatrist position. Moving on to page 13, in the middle is the decision for the subcommittee. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation of $3.3 million in general fund appropriations over the 2023-25 biennium to fund the conversion of 12 intermittent positions to state full-time positions, 1 new state licensed psychologist position, and 1 new contract forensic psychiatrist position, and associated costs to support forensic bed capacity at the Stein Forensic Facility.
Any questions regarding that? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. Motion carries.
Continuing on page 13 is the second major closing issue, Ross and Neal Psychiatric Hospital Forensic Bed Expansion. The governor recommends the addition of 37 new full-time positions and associated costs, including 21 forensic specialists positions, 16 psychiatric nurse positions, as well as contract costs to support housing clients in the Ross and Neal Psychiatric Hospital, funded with $7.6 million in general fund appropriations over the 23-25 biennium. And moving on to page 14 is the decision for the subcommittee at the bottom. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation of $7.6 million in general fund appropriations over the 2023-25 biennium to fund 37 new positions for support of the 30 forensic bed D-POD unit at the Ross and Neal Psychiatric Hospital?
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. Moving on to page 15 is closing item number 3, medication clinic caseload-driven new position. The governor recommends $598,208 in general fund appropriations over the 2023-25 biennium to fund 1 new contract psychiatrist position and associated costs for the medication clinic. And the decision before the committee is on page 16. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation of $598,208 in general fund appropriations over the 2023-25 biennium to fund 1 contract psychiatrist position for the medication clinic?
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Continuing on page 16 is closing item number 4, American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds allocation for the City of Las Vegas Detention Center for the 45 forensic bed expansion. the governor recommends the budgeting of the ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds of $40.2 million over the 2023-25 biennium to continue the renovation and staffing of the City of Las Vegas Detention Center for an additional 45 forensic beds to expand capacity. Moving on to page 17 at the bottom, the governor's office testified at the October 20th, 2022 IFC meeting that the detention center was anticipated to be partially renovated and ready to be used by July 2023. Therefore, the IFC approved the full-time position costs to begin in fiscal year 2024. However, in the March 17th, 2023 follow-up memo response to the March 9th, 2023 budget hearing, the agency indicated the renovation of the City of Las Vegas Detention Center would be completed December of 2024 at the earliest. And this would only occur if lease negotiations and the city's necessary renovations prior to commencement of the division's construction project are done timely. Moving on to page 18, according to the agency, the delay of the renovation to December 2024, the staffing plan of 115 positions would remain the same, but the agency would defer the hiring dates of the positions. If I can direct your attention to the top of page 19, shows you a table of the breakout of the updated projections that take into consideration of the delay in the opening of the detention center. So the decision before the subcommittee would be on page 19. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the revisions to the governor's recommended budget due to the delays in the renovation of Las Vegas Detention Center, which would allocate ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds of $9.4 million in fiscal year 2024, $10 million in fiscal year 2025, and place $23.3 million in the ARPA Forensic Las Vegas Jail Renovation Reserve category to fund fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027 personnel and operating expenditures through December 31st, 2026. This revision would result in $11.7 million in ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund savings from the project, which could be reallocated by the legislature for other allowable programs.
I believe we have some questions before I accept a motion. Go ahead, Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but with this delay of these 45 beds and an overall overview we have been presented today, my question is, how many, with this delay, are we housing these potential patients/inmates that need to have these forensic beds in jails, or are we housing anybody out of state? What's the impact of these delays on our population?
Ooh, it's a race to the table. I'd remind everyone to please state your name for the record and spell it.
Good morning. Good morning, Lisa Sherrick, Administrator for the Division, SHERYCH. So these individuals are in jail, waiting for services by us.
Thank you for that. And just to be clear, we are not housing any of these folks out of state.
Lisa Sherrick, for the record, no, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
I'd
And
be
one last
shocked if that
question. Are they
happened.
getting, these that should be in these special beds, are they getting any mental health services while they're waiting to be transferred to these forensic beds?
Joe Millay for the record. Inside the jail, the detention centers, they do have contracted medical services, and we do have communications on a regular basis with our psychiatrists and our staff, with their staff, for any questions they may have on these clients.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
I think we have another question from Speaker Yeager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I remember talking about this and bringing it before IFC, and obviously was supportive of it then. And I thought the impetus was the fact that we were not servicing folks in a timely manner, and we didn't have bed space. Disappointed to hear there's delays, but I understand that's the reality of the world we live in. I just wondered if you could speak to what the wait time is right now, because I think the one of the issues was we wanted to avoid getting involved in litigation on the state side of not being able to provide these services. So is this delay going to impact that in any way, or have we been able to clear some of the backlog that existed before, I guess, when we last talked, which I think was 6 or 8 months ago?
Jomali, for the record, there's a number of...
Can I have you pull down that microphone just a little bit? Thank you.
Jomali, for the record. Thank you. Great question. So first of all, the length of stay varies. We take them based on the court file date, and so that's kind of how we determine who comes in next. But we do have a number of programs that we're implementing. We've had some success with both the court system and with some of our programmings as well that are trying to divert more of these individuals before they get into the forensic pathway. So we've had some good conversations around that. So that's been successful, but it's just beginning right now. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions regarding this? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. Moving on to page 20 is additional coronavirus state fiscal recovery projects. There are 2 projects. If you move on to page 21, there's a table at the top that demonstrates 2 projects that would continue in the fiscal year 2024. The renovation of the Stein Forensic Facility and the Recuperative Care Center. And the decision is below the table there for the subcommittee. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $4.8 million in fiscal year 2024 of ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds for the renovation of the Stein Forensic Facility and $10 million in fiscal year 2024 of ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds for the Recuperative Care Center?
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Moving on, there are other closing items, 1 through 11 in this budget. Closing item 10 is a budget amendment, A232433-161, which this one will be considered as part of the statewide decision. Then closing item number 11, division cost allocation correction. Fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to the base budget and decision unit E802, requiring additional general fund appropriations totaling $2.1 million over the 2023-25 biennium, as shown in the adjustment section at the bottom of this document. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 7 and other closing item number 9 be closed as recommended by the governor, and other closing item 11 be closed with the noted technical adjustment. Other closing items 8 and 10 be deferred as they will be considered by the money committees during the statewide decisions closing, and request authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Any questions? Seeing none, I take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously.
Moving on to page 25 is budget account Lakes Crossing Center, budget account 3645. There are no major closing issues in this budget account. There is a one Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds project, which is the replacement of security camera and door control system. This was not in the executive budget, but the agency provided updated projections for this budget. So fiscal staff recommends a revision to the executive budget based on the agency's updated projections related to the ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds for the replacement security camera and door access control system of $783,475 in fiscal year '24 and $592,616 in fiscal year 2025. Consistent with the direction provided by the money committees during the work session held on April 4th, 2023, relating to the budgeting of these funds. The decision for the subcommittee: does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds totaling $783,475 in fiscal year 2024, $592,616 in fiscal year 2025, based on the updated projections from the agency to fund the replacement security camera system and the door access control system project.
Any questions? Seeing none, I take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion carries.
Okay, moving on, other closing items, 1 through 9. The closing item number 8 is the division cost allocation correction. Fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustments to the base budget and decision unit E802 requiring additional general fund appropriations totaling $326,732 over the 2023-25 biennium, as shown in the adjustment section at the end of this document. Then closing item number 9 is a budget amendment A232363645. The governor recommends $11,392,000 in general fund appropriations over the 23-25 biennium to fund 1 grade increase for the correctional lieutenant position. This budget amendment will be considered as part of the statewide discussion. So on the at the top of page 27, fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 5 and item 7 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 8 be closed with the noted technical adjustment. Other closing items 6 and 9 be deferred as they will be considered by the money committees during the statewide decisions closing, and request authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Any questions regarding that recommendation? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to page 29, rural clinics budget, budget count 3648. There are no major closings issues in this budget. There is coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds. The governor recommends the budgeting of American Rescue Plan Act coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds of $343,429 over the 2023-25 biennium to continue to fund the rural mobile crisis response teams for outpatient and community-based support service for youth. Moving on to page 30, at the top is the decision for the subcommittees. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds totaling $343,429 over the 2023-25 biennium to fund the rural mobile crisis response teams as recommended by the governor?
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Continuing on, page 30, or 11 other closing items. Closing item 10 is the divisional cost allocation correction. Fiscal staff recommends technical adjustment to the base budget and decision unit E802 requiring additional general fund appropriations totaling $584,212 over the 2023-25 biennium, as shown in the adjustment section at the end of this document. Other closing item 11 is a base budget technical adjustment. Fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to increase non-buildings and grounds building office rent by $21,527 in fiscal year 2024 and $30,458 in fiscal year 2025. Funded with general fund appropriations to support the rate increase for the Lovelock and Winnemucca building office rent leases, which were approved by the Board of Examiners in fiscal year 2023. So at the bottom, fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 9 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 10 and 11 be closed with the noted technical adjustments and request authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, to accept a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? I jumped ahead of myself there. I was all ready to vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Seeing none, the motion carries.
Okay, moving on to page 33 is the crisis response budget, 3165. There are two major closing issues in this budget. The first one is new telecom fees, position funding change, and expiring federal grant. The governor recommends $28.4 million in new telecom fees over the 2023-25 biennium to continue the 3-digit 988 crisis hotline program and to support one existing full-time clinical program planner position and associated costs. Moving on to page 34, the expiring federal grant is halfway down the page. The executive budget recommends eliminating the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration 988 Capacity Building Federal Grant that funded the initial implementation of the 988 hotline, a total reduction of $221,551 over the 2023-25 biennium. This federal grant is expected to expire April 29, 2024. So moving on to page 35, there are two tables. One is $28.2 million and the other is $3 million over the biennium. So during the agency's presentation before the Legislative Commission's Budget Subcommittee on January 26, 2023, the agency mentioned a potential problem with collecting the full amount of the telecom fees included in the executive budget. In a follow-up letter dated February 16, 2023, the agency indicated the telecom communication companies have provided feedback that the definition in the law passed during the 2021 legislative session does not cover certain types of service lines. According to the agency, if this language is not corrected through legislation, it will only be able to collect on landlines and not mobile communication devices, which would result in a projected revenue amount of $1.5 million per year versus the projected $15 million per year as recommended by the governor. So moving on to page 36, during the March 9th, 2023 hearing, the agency testified that the crisis response programs are currently funded with one-time or startup federal funds, and the telecom fees would be the only source of funds to continue the program ongoing. The agency also indicated if legislation to change the language to allow certain types of communication lines to be charged were not to be passed, the telecom companies would not be able to collect a 35-cent surcharge on certain phone lines. As previously indicated, the governor's office submitted a bill draft request to make the necessary statutory changes Additionally, as Senate Bill 237, requested by the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Judiciary, would facilitate the necessary statutory changes to allow certain types of communication lines to be charged. Senate Bill 237 was referred to the Senate Committee on Finance on April 17, 2023. So as shown in the two tables on page 35, if there were no change to the statute, the agency would collect approximately $3 million over the biennium instead of the $30 million over the biennium, as recommended by the governor. So if, just a note out there, fiscal staff would note, if this were to be approved and the SB 237 legislation were not to be approved, or other legislation, the agency would have the ability to do a work program to align the revenues and expenditures to the actions taken by the legislation. So at the bottom of page 36 is the decision for the subcommittee. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation of $28.4 million in new telecom fees over the 2023-25 biennium and a change in the funding source of one existing position contingent upon passage and approval of Senate Bill 237 or other enabling legislation? And does the subcommittee wish to recommend the unobligated new telecom fee revenues be placed in a reserve contingent upon passage and approval of Senate Bill 237 or other enabling legislation? And does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to eliminate the expiring federal substance abuse and mental services Administration 988 capacity building grant totaling $221,551 over the 2023-25 biennium?
Thank you for that recommendation. And I think we have a comment from Majority Leader Canizaro.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to clarify a few things in this particular budget, because I know there's been a lot of conversations about Senate Bill 237, and the way that I am seeing this, I know we've talked in previous budget hearings about what these telecom fees would go to. Without that legislation, we're not able to collect that fee, and so we would not receive. The difference is receiving the $15 million per year of the biennium versus $1.5 million per year under this particular decision unit. And I don't know if you're the right person or if there's someone else out there who
Yes.
may be able to phone a friend on.
That is
Ms.
correct.
Greenmeyer. Okay,
Yes,
and
that's
then
correct.
the differences in what that is funding, as I also understand it, are the continuation of the 988 hotline program components and that traffic control hub, so the call center piece of it. There are mobile crisis response units that would be funded with that $28.4 million that's built into the governor's recommended budget for those crisis centers to be able to actually utilize what 988 is designed for, to instead of calling in law enforcement for every mental health issue, there would be some crisis intervention pieces. And then also inpatient treatment and assessment services at crisis stabilization centers, so that, again, we're funding a lot of those services for what that 988 piece was designed to do. So those are the pieces. That's the difference. Otherwise, without that SB 237, it is just being able to keep those phone lines open.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And I guess this is maybe more of a comment, Madam Chair, if I may. The difference between 15 million each year of the biennium and 1.5 million is the difference between very essential services that I think we have all recognized, and I know many of my colleagues here have, in the course of, I remember those discussions I think it was then Senator Ratty had been working on the 988 pieces of legislation, and we've worked on mobile, crisis support in various circumstances. But this is, I think, for my purposes, very vital infrastructure that we recognize we have a need for, that the 988 line is designed to not only help us to identify, but also to address. And without that funding, it is a very significant difference in the services that we're able to provide. And that funding is based on a bill that has already passed out of this legislature and has already been approved and is already in the process of being implemented. But for some language issues, we wouldn't be in this position. Not only that, but this budget is built on an assumption that we will have that 28.4 million. So I am comfortable approving this. Obviously, it'll be contingent upon the passage of that piece of legislation. But for what it is worth, I would strongly encourage all of my colleagues to take a look at that bill as it comes before the money committees, because I think it is not only essential to funding very important services, but will make a huge difference in how the governor's recommended budget is built. With all of those funds for these pieces, or us having to make then a different decision because we just don't want to approve that particular funding and then are left with just some phone lines that hopefully will somehow be able to get people to services.
And I have a couple questions, and for probably the agency. It's my understanding without the passage of that bill, it would just be essentially phone lines, and we wouldn't be able to supplement with those other potential services within the community. Is that a correct understanding?
Cody Finney, Deputy Administrator for the Division of Public and Behavioral Health. Yes, that is a correct understanding. Without some enabling legislation to correct that problem with the language, we will be severely limited about what additional infrastructure we can build and what services we can fund.
And I'm having flashbacks to some of the other projects that were hoped to be funded with this potential money that's included in here. There's the potential to expand a lot more of this crisis intervention, crisis response programming within the local communities that is still going unmet, even with this extra $30 million if this Senate Bill 237 would pass. Is that correct?
Cody Finney, for the record. It is our understanding at this point that there may be continuing need. We're working with all the communities we can work with at this point to make sure we meet their needs as we try to roll this out.
And thank you. And I think we have another question or comment from Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I agree with the Majority Leader. I think this is important legislation for important programs. We need to have those programs. So I'm looking forward to the hearing in Finance. I believe it's in Senate Finance. We'll get it moving. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I know that there was a recommendation that was previously stated by staff, and I would entertain a motion at this time.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Tiffany Greenemeyer for the record. Moving on to page 37 in this budget is the second major closing item. The governor recommends $1.5 million in telecom fees over the 2023-25 biennium for 10 new full-time positions and associated costs. These fees are in addition to the $28.4 million in the telecom fees recommended in major closing issue 1. So moving on to page 38. These positions are funded with the telecom fees as noted in major closing issue 1. Funding sufficient to support this decision unit would be contingent on the passage and approval of enabling legislation. So the decision for the subcommittee, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation of $1.5 million in new telecom fees over the 2023-25 biennium for the 10 new positions contingent upon passage and approval of Senate Bill 237 or other enabling legislation?
Any other questions regarding this? At this time, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone approved say nay. Motion carries.
Moving on, there are 4 coronavirus state fiscal recovery projects in this budget that fiscal staff recommends revisions to fiscal year '24 for all 4 of these budgets. And then moving on to, as you can see in the bottom of page 39, there's a table for the 4 projects. And the decision for the subcommittee is on page 40. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of A, in the base budget, $2.2 million in ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year '24 to fund the crisis counselors for the Nevada Resilience Project? B, in the base budget, $3.3 million in the ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year 2024 to fund the 988 crisis call center and care traffic control hub. And C, in the base budget, $19.8 million in ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds over the 2023-25 biennium as recommended by the governor to fund the crisis stabilization centers. And D, in the base budget, $3.9 million in ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year 2024 to fund the crisis triage and residential treatment and inpatient care services.
Any questions regarding those recommendations? Seeing none, we do have a question. Go ahead, Senator Titus.
Thank you. Just for clarification, so with this proposal, it will go ahead and give a base funding for the 988 regardless of the passage of 237, correct?
These dollars here is just for the implementation of these programs, so it wouldn't continue ongoing.
Correct. So these are one-time basis to get this thing started, because my concern is that as SB 237 works its way through and we say it passes, that money is going to take a while to accumulate. In the meantime, we have this up and running with this funding.
Yes, in fiscal year 2024.
Great. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Continuing on page 40 is, there are 2 other closing items, and number 2 is a budget amendment A23-0673165 for the transfer of telecom fees to the Department of Health and Human Services Director's Office Data Analytics for 1 new biostatistician position. The funding in the amendment would require new telecom fees to fund this transfer, and sufficient additional fees would be contingent upon passage and approval of an enabling legislation, as noted in major closing item issue 1. Fiscal staff recommends closing item 1 be closed as recommended by the governor. Approval of budget amendment A23-0673165. In other, closing item 2, contingent upon passage and approval of Senate Bill 237 or other enabling legislation, and requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Any other questions regarding that? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Let's move on to the next one.
Okay, moving on to page 43 in your packet is the Behavioral Health Administration account, budget account 3168. This budget account has 1 major closing issue, and it's the request for new administrative services officer position. The governor recommends $317,546 in behavioral health cost allocation reimbursement charges and $516 in Medicaid administration charges over the 23-25 biennium for the addition of 1 new full-time classified administrative service officer for and associated costs. This position is recommended to start July 2023 and would be located in northern Nevada. Moving on to page 44 is the decision for the subcommittee. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $317,546 in behavioral health cost allocation reimbursement charges and $516 in Medicaid administration charges to fund one new full-time administrative service officer and associated costs as recommended by the governor?
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Okay, moving on with page 44 there is one ARPA project in this budget. The governor recommends the budgeting of ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds of $156,000 over the 2023-25 biennium to continue the upgrade for the electronic health record system to the NX platform. Fiscal staff recommends a revision to the ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds to reflect $628,494 in fiscal year 2024 for the Nexus platform project. So the decision at the bottom for the subcommittee: does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the American Rescue Plan Act coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds totaling $628,494 in fiscal year 2024, including the noted revision based upon projections provided by the agency to support the upgrade and NX platform project?
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Oh, you got a loud teacher voice.
Second. I have a button that doesn't want to work.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All right. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to page 45. There are 7 other closing items. Fiscal staff recommends closing items 1 through 7 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second. I don't have a button.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
All right, moving on to page 47 is the behavioral health prevention and treatment budget account, budget 3170. There are no major closing issues in this budget. Moving on to page 48, there are 3 ARPA programs that need to be continued. And the decision for you on the page 49 at the top, decision for the subcommittee: does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of A, base $74,972 in federal ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year 2024 to continue grants to Moxie Up for staffing to assist middle and high school youth, including the noted revision based on the agency projections. B, in the base budget, is $1.8 million in federal ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year 2024 for the assertive community treatment and forensic assertive community treatment programs, including the noted revisions based on the agency projections. The next one is C in the base budget is $964,276 in federal ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year 2024 to expand the newborn screening panel to include an opiate exposure test, including the noted revisions based on the agency projections.
Any questions regarding those recommendations? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
I'm back. Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries.
So moving on, page 49, other closing items 1 through 6. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 6 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Any questions regarding that recommendation? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries. And that brings us, I think, to 3,200 and 3,255, and I will ask you to highlight those both together, and then we'll have any questions after.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you move on to page 55, the last two budgets are staff closings. Fiscal staff is responsible for developing recommendations for the following budgets. To assist with the closing, fiscal staff has identified budgets that are recommended to be closed as recommended by the governor. So at the fiscal staff recommends that the following budgets be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary. 101, 3,200, problem gambling, and 101, 3,255, alcohol tax program.
Do we have any questions regarding those two budget accounts? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries. Okay. And I think we're doing a little switcheroo here. See if we can take a... Just stand in recess for the next minute. Okay, we're back. It really was a 1 minute recess. Yeah. Okay, let's get started. We have a change here, so we will get started back on, let's see, 4894.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Chris English from LCB Fiscal for the record. Today we have 11 Division of Child and Family Services budgets, 7 of which had a hearing on March 21st. And I will start with the first one. It is on page 57 of your packet, and it is the Victim Services Budget 4894. This budget had one major closing issue. The governor recommends transferring federal grant funds from the DCFS administration budget totaling $31.5 million over the 2023 to 25 biennium to consolidate revenues and expenditures for victim support services in a new victim services budget. The decision for the subcommittee can be found on page 59. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of a transfer of $31.5 million in federal victims of crime and family violence prevention services funding from the DCFS administration budget to the new victim services budget as recommended by the governor?
Do you have any questions regarding that? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries. Move on to 3147.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Budget 3147 is the Youth Alternative Placement budget. There was one major closing issue in this budget, and it was the under-budgeting of general fund appropriations. The governor recommends 8.0 million, 2.0 million general fund, and 6.0 million county participation funds to support the China Spring, Aurora Pines, and Spring Mountain youth camps. A budget amendment was transmitted by the Governor's Finance Office on March 3rd to return general fund appropriations and county participation funds to the FY22 legislatively approved amounts of 8.0 million, 3.6 million general fund, and 4.4 million county participation funds. The decision for the subcommittee can be found on page 62. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation of 8.0 million over the 2023 to 25 biennium to support the China Springs, Aurora Pines, and Spring Mountain youth camps, including budget amendment A23057-3147, which would return funding to the FY22 legislatively approved amounts of 3.6 million general fund and 4.4 million county participation funds over the 2023 to 25 biennium?
Thank you. I just have a statement to make. I know that we are going to recommend moving this. However, it has come to our attention that there has been some discrepancy in the governor's recommendation of those 2022 levels, which are significantly lower than the 2021 levels. And so we are going to ask staff to kind of take a look at that to see if we can locate that about $400,000 that's missing there. 400,000, I'm sorry, per year, to see if we can find a way to solve that problem. But this time I would entertain a motion based on that recommendation as read by staff.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to our next budget on page 65 of your packet, it is the Summit View Youth Center budget, 3148. There were no major closing issues in this budget. Fiscal staff recommends one technical adjustment. Additionally, there are two other items that are related to compensation and will be decided at a later date by the joint full committees. There are 7 other closing items, and the decision box can be found on page 66 of your packet. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1, 2, and 4 be recommended to be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 5 be recommended to be closed as adjusted by budget amendment A231173-148. The language recommended by the governor in other closing item 7 be added to the Appropriations Act for the 2023 to 25 biennium, and defer action taken on other closing items 3 and 6, as those will be considered by the joint full committees when statewide decision units, including compensation recommendations, will be considered.
Any further questions regarding that recommendation? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next budget is the Caliente Youth Center, budget 3179. It is on page 69 of your packet. Major closing issue in this budget is the reduction of capacity, elimination of positions, and reclassification. There are 3 recommended technical adjustments in this budget. The governor recommends a reduction of $3.2 million, $3.1 million general fund over the 2023 to 25 biennium to reduce bed capacity at Caliente Youth Center from 112 beds to 80 beds, to eliminate 19 Group Supervisor 2 positions and associated expenditures, and to support a reclassification of 2 Group Supervisor 4 positions to Assistant Head Group Supervisors. In discussions with the agency after the budget hearing, it became clear that the reclassification of the 2 Group Supervisor 4 positions were added in error. So fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to remove those reclassifications, and that can be seen above the decision box on page 71. The decision for the subcommittee: does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of a reduction of $3.2 million, $3.1 million general fund over the 23 to 25 biennium to reduce capacity at Caliente Youth Center from 112 to 80 beds through the elimination of 19 Group Supervisor 2 positions and associated expenditures, and a technical adjustment to eliminate the reclassification of 2 Group Supervisor 4 positions to Assistant Head Group Supervisor positions.
Any questions regarding that recommendation? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 3 other closing items in this budget, and they can be seen on page 71. Fiscal staff recommends other closing item 1 be closed as recommended by the governor, and other closing items 2 and 3 be closed with the noted technical adjustments, and requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Do we have any questions regarding that? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Approved. I'm Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All right. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That will take us to our next budget, which is the Northern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget, and that starts on page 75 of your packet. There were 2 major closing issues in this budget. 1 technical adjustment is recommended, and 1 recommendation to change a decision unit to a direct appropriation is also recommended. Major closing issue 1 is the addition of 7 new permanent mobile crisis response team positions. The governor recommends $1.3 million in general fund appropriations and $8,157 in federal Medicaid reimbursement funds over the 23 to 25 biennium to support 7 new permanent positions and associated expenditures to support the Northern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services Mobile Crisis Response Team. The decision for the subcommittee is on page 76. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $1.3 million in general fund appropriations and $8,157 in federal Medicaid reimbursement to fund the addition of 7 permanent positions and associated expenditures for the Mobile Crisis Response Team program as recommended by the governor?
Do you have any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to major closing issue 2. It is a change in funding source for existing positions and the addition of 1 new accounting assistant. The governor recommends a net funding reduction of $13,863, $1.4 million general fund increase in FY 2025 to change the funding source from American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds to $1.4 million in general fund appropriations and $261,208 in Medicaid reimbursement funds to continue 22 positions that were added during the 2021 to 2023 biennium funded with American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds, and to support 1 new accounting assistant 3 and associated expenditures. Since the budget hearing, the agency has made progress in establishing positions and has added 2 additional positions, bringing the total established to 10 positions. Fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment that is included in the decision box on page 79 to reduce general fund appropriations by $6,312 to remove 2 duplicated fleet service vehicles. The decision for the subcommittee. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of a net funding reduction of $20,175, a $1.3 million general fund increase in FY 2025, including a technical adjustment to remove 2 duplicated fleet service vehicles, to change the funding source from Federal American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds to $1.3 million in general fund appropriations and $261,208 in Medicaid reimbursement funds, to continue 22 state positions that were added during the 2021 to 23 biennium, and to add 1 accounting assistant and associated expenditures as recommended by the governor.
Thank you. I'm glad to see that we've moved up to 2 additional employees. Hopefully we can get to that 22 and keep that momentum rolling. But I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 11 other closing items in this budget. Other closing item number 10 can be seen on the top of page 80. That is the decision unit that was referenced earlier in the DPBH budgets. Fiscal staff is recommending a direct appropriation in this budget to fund Building 8A expenditures, as opposed to the transfer unit that was recommended originally. The decision for the other items is found on page 80. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 9 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 10 be closed as being funded by a direct appropriation to this budget instead of as a transfer. And the language recommended by the governor in other closing item 11 be added to the Appropriations Act for the 2023 to 25 biennium, and request authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 3 Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund items that require a decision for fiscal year 2024 funding. The decision for the subcommittee. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of in base $446,313 in ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds in FY 2024 to fund the 4 mobile crisis response team positions and associated expenditures for Washoe County School District. B, base funding of $241,020 in ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds in FY 2024 to fund the 6 part-time public service interns and associated expenditures to support behavioral health workforce development. And C, base $923,073 in ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds in FY 2024 to fund the Early Childhood Day Treatment Program for children with severe emotional disturbance, including the 12 new positions and associated expenditures as recommended by the governor.
Do you have any questions regarding that recommendation in these budget? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries. That brings us to 3646.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget starts on page 83 of your packet. This budget had 4 major closing issues, and the first of these is the addition of 8 new mobile crisis response team positions and 1 new accounting assistant. The governor recommends $1.8 million, $1.7 million general fund to support 9 new positions and associated expenditures, including 8 positions to support the Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services Mobile Crisis Response Team program, and 1 new accounting assistant. The decision for the subcommittee is on page 85. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $1.8 million, $1.7 million general fund to fund 9 permanent positions and associated expenditures, including 8 positions for the Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services Mobile Crisis Response Team program, and 1 new accounting assistant as recommended by the governor?
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Major closing issue 2 is a change in funding source for existing positions and the addition of 5 new accounting assistants. Since the budget hearing, there has been an update, and this budget has added an additional 10 positions, bringing the total established to 17. The decision for the subcommittee is on page 87. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of net funding increase of $332,900, a $2.4 million general fund increase in FY 2025 to change the funding from American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds to $2.4 million general fund appropriations and $184,486 in Medicaid reimbursement funds to continue 25 state positions that were added in the 2021 to 23 biennium, and to add 5 new accounting assistants and associated expenditures as recommended by the governor.
Any questions regarding that recommendation? Seeing none, I accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Major closing issue 3 is the elimination of 14 grant-funded positions. The governor recommends reductions totaling $2.5 million in federal funds over the 2023 to 25 biennium to eliminate 14 positions and associated expenditures due to the expiration of Federal System of Care Grant and the Federal Pediatric Mental Health Care Access Grant on September 29th, 2023. The decision for the subcommittee: does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of reductions totaling $2.5 million in federal funds over the 2023 to 25 biennium to eliminate 14 positions and associated expenditures due to the expiration of the Federal System of Care Grant and the Federal Pediatric Mental Health Care Access Grant on September 29th, 2023, as recommended by the governor?
And if I could just clarify, it's my understanding that they did apply for a one-time or 1 year, like, additional funds. Is that correct?
That's correct. During the hearing, the agency indicated that they intend to apply for the no-cost 1-year extension, and if that is approved, those 10 positions associated with that grant would be funded until September of 2024.
Okay. And do we have anyone that can confirm that that was in fact applied for, or that's just the intention at this point?
Good morning. For the record, Cindy Pitlock. Madam Chair, yes, we will be applying for that 1-year grant extension. It is a little too early. We have to wait, I think, until July, and then we'll determine whether or not we're awarded that, I think, the end of August. So all of those pieces of that puzzle are falling into place. It's just a timing issue, but we fully intend on applying for that 1-year no-cost extension.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other further questions? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to major closing issue 4 in this budget, which is the transfer in of 22 positions and the addition of 56 new positions to staff the Desert Willow Treatment Center. The governor recommends transferring in $3.6 million, $1.5 million general fund, the net of funding source changes in Decision Unit E511 to transfer in 22 vacant positions and associated expenditures from the Northern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget. Additionally, the governor recommends $9.3 million, $4.4 million general fund to support 56 new positions and associated expenditures to staff the Desert Willow Treatment Center for a full capacity of 58 beds. In a written response following the hearing, the agency clarified that the full capacity of Desert Willow Treatment Center is 54 beds, not 58 beds, as was indicated in the executive budget. During the hearing, the hardening project was discussed. The agency confirmed that the hardening project of the facility is scheduled to begin February 26, 2024, and the projected completion of the project is on March 19th, 2025. It's estimated that full occupancy of 54 beds after the hardening project would be available for the agency on April 1st, 2025. According to the agency, in order to not displace youth in care at the Desert Willow Treatment Center, once the hardening project begins, 1 unit of 10 beds would be kept vacant, and youth would be rotated between units as needed when other units are under construction. Despite the hardening project spanning from February 2024 to March of 2025, the agency has indicated a preference to fund all positions prior to the start of the hardening project, and then to hold 23 positions vacant from February 2024 through February of 2025. 23 positions is the number of positions the agency indicates that can remain vacant while having all but 1 unit fully staffed. According to the agency, the current combined census at Desert Willow is 25 youth. Desert Willow and Oasis is 25 youth, but DCFS believes it can reach a census of 54 prior to the start of the hardening project. Fiscal staff has outlined 3 options regarding the governor's recommendation for 56 new positions, and these can be seen summarized in the table on page 93. Option A in this table is the governor's recommended option, which would staff 56 positions and 54 beds through the 2023 to 25 biennium. Option B is the agency preferred option, which would staff 54 beds and the new positions prior to the start of the hardening project, and then hold 23 positions vacant through the duration of the hardening project, and then again staff those positions and beds from March 2025 to the end of the biennium. And option C is to hold 23 positions vacant until the completion of the hardening project, until it nears completion in February 2025. And in March 2025, all 56 positions would be funded and 54 beds could be staffed. If the subcommittee wishes to recommend options B or C, the subcommittee could consider recommending placing the general fund savings in the interim finance committee contingency account as a restricted allocation available to the agency in the event that it can demonstrate need. Additionally, the subcommittee may wish to recommend the issuance of a letter of intent to have the agency report on a semi-annual basis on its progress in filling positions, the average bed census, and progress on completing the hardening project. The decision box can be seen on page 94, and I think we'll do this in 2 parts. The decision for the subcommittee for decision units E511 and E912. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of transferred funding of $3.6 million, $1.5 million general fund to transfer in 22 positions and associated expenditures from the Northern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget to the Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget as recommended by the governor?
Before we get to, well, actually, does anyone have any questions about that first recommendation? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. Motion carries. And then before we get into, turn it over to staff for some of the other decisions on E375, I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. When we go back to that chart on page 93 and we're talking about option B, it shows kind of, is it my understanding that it's hiring those positions and then not having those positions for 6 months and then having those positions again? Is that how I read that?
So that is how it appears in the table. In discussing this option with the agency, it was indicated that the intent is not to hire positions and then eliminate those positions, but rather to consider those positions as more of a vacancy savings option, where in that time period they would hold those 23 positions vacant, which would lead to budgetary savings, but the intent was not to hire and then eliminate positions.
So those just be held open until the hardening project was done?
That's correct, through the duration of the hardening project until it nears completion in February of 2025.
Do we have any other questions regarding this budget and recommendation?
Just, Madam Chair, for the record, Brody Lizer, just if I can, I believe, help clarify. Option B, while the intent would not be to eliminate the incumbents from those positions, option B would eliminate the funding for those positions. So if all 56 positions were filled under option B and come February 2024, there would be no funding in the budget for 23 of those positions, and the agency would be required to find vacant positions to move the incumbents into, is my understanding of option B, that the funding represented would not include funding for all 56 over the entire biennium. So just want to make sure that that's clear, that option B would eliminate funding for 23 of the 56 positions from the time period of February 2024 to February 2025.
Thank you for that clarification on the record. And under option C, we wouldn't be funding those positions until the completion of that hardening project when they would be able to start. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, just again, for the record, that as Mr. English indicated, that is correct. There will be also, I believe, some discussion and an option to set some money aside in the IFC contingency account, so that under option C, funding would be provided for 33 positions from October 2023 through February of 2025. There will be an option for the subcommittee to consider to place general funds in the IFC contingency account as restricted funds, so that if the agency were to demonstrate a need to bring on more positions, they would have an opportunity to go through the process to request an allocation from the contingency account, if that's the recommendation of the subcommittee.
And I'm sorry, I saw Assemblyman Haven turn around. Did you have a question about the hardening project? Okay, thanks. Okay, I will turn it back over. It would be my recommendation to accept a motion regarding option C. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Well, I think actually we haven't read option C, so I'm going to turn it back to. We have. Just for everyone else, I will turn this back over to staff regarding option C.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Decision Unit E375. Option A, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $9.3 million, $4.4 million general fund to support 56 new positions and associated expenditures to staff the Desert Willow Treatment Center for a full capacity of 54 beds as recommended by the governor? Or option B, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $7.3 million, $3.6 million general fund to support 56 new positions and associated expenditures to staff Desert Willow Treatment Center for a full capacity of 54 beds until February 2024, at which point 23 positions would not be funded from February 2024 through February 2025, and 44 beds would be available in that time period, and to fund the additional 23 positions for a full capacity of 54 beds again in March of 2025? Or option C, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $6.8 million, $3.2 million general fund to support 33 new positions and associated expenditures to staff the Desert Willow Treatment Center for a capacity of 44 beds until March of 2025, which would hold 23 positions vacant from October 2023 through February 2025, and to fund all 56 positions for a full capacity of 54 beds, starting in March of 2025. If the subcommittee wishes to recommend options B or C, does the subcommittee wish to recommend placing the identified general fund savings in the Interim Finance Committee's contingency account as a restricted allocation available to the agency in the event that it can demonstrate need? And finally, does the subcommittee want to recommend recommend the issuance of a letter of intent to have the agency report on a semi-annual basis on its progress in filling positions, the average bed census, progress completing the hardening project, and any information it would require to release funds from the contingency account should the subcommittee recommend placing all or some of the identified general fund savings in the contingency account.
Thank you. So at this time, I would accept a motion. Oh, do you have a question? Yes. Go ahead, Senator Titus.
Thank you for that. All the options and making sure that we can stay somewhat fluid here in every ever-moving world that we live in. I do support C, but my question is that the comment that in the event that it can demonstrate need, would that be if they could demonstrate need sooner? Would we, if it's in that contingency account, would we be able to allocate it sooner than 2025?
It is my understanding that's correct, but I can have staff confirm that.
Yes, that is correct.
Right, thank you. That's what I was hoping for. Thank you.
Any other additional questions regarding this recommendation? Okay, at this time I accept a motion.
I would like to make a motion for C, and then also to recommend placing the identified general fund savings in the Interim Finance Committee contingency account and the insurance of a letter of intent.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say no. Nay? No, you can say no too. Seeing none, the motion carries, and we will move on to the next one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 8 other closing items in this budget, and fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 8 be closed as recommended by the governor, and requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Any questions? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the bottom of page 96, there is an additional decision for the subcommittee regarding the coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in the base budget. The decision for the subcommittee: does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of base funding of $1.5 million in ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year 2024 to fund the 13 mobile crisis response team positions and associated expenditures for Clark County School District? B, base funding of $160,680 in ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year 2024 to fund the 4 part-time public service interns and associated expenditures to support behavioral health workforce development. And C, base funding of $771,899 in ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds in fiscal year 2024 to fund the early childhood day treatment program for children with a severe emotional disturbance, including the 8 new positions and associated expenditures as recommended by the governor.
Thank you. Any questions regarding that? I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That takes us to our next budget, which is the Victims of Crime budget, Budget 4895. This budget had 2 major closing issues, and 1 technical adjustment is recommended. First major closing issue is a funding source change from court administrative assessments to general fund appropriations, and the addition of general fund to support victims of crime budget. The governor recommends $6.5 million in general funds over the 2023 to 25 biennium to replace court assessment fees and to provide additional general funds to support this budget. Correspondingly, a $2.1 million reduction in court administrative assessment fee revenue over the 2023 to 25 biennium is recommended. During the budget hearing, the subcommittee asked the agency if the general fund appropriations were approved. Would the $4.4 million in general fund appropriations be sufficient to meet payment obligations over the 2023 to 25 biennium? During the hearing, the agency indicated that this funding would be sufficient, but 3 days after the hearing, the agency received their federal allocation. On March 24th, 2023, the agency received this victims' compensation formula grant allocation for federal fiscal year 2023. The allocation was $1 million, which is $1.3 million less than federal fiscal year 2022, and significantly less than the $2.3 million that was budgeted in fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025. According to the agency, this would create a shortfall of $2.3 million over the 2023 to 25 biennium, and if this shortfall is not addressed, the agency would be unable to fund all victims' compensation claims. The agency indicates that being able to fund victims' compensation claims is critical, as eligibility for Victims of Crime Assistance Fund dollars, which total an estimated $25.2 million over the 2023 to 25 biennium and were discussed in the Victim Services budget, is contingent on the agency's ability to pay victims' compensation claims. Because this issue was recently brought to staff's attention and because the governor's finance office and the agency have yet to determine the most appropriate path forward with regard to the reduced federal grant funding, fiscal staff recommends that the subcommittee's recommendation be to defer this issue to the joint full committee closing, which is currently planned for Saturday, April 29th. Does the subcommittee wish to defer making a recommendation on the governor's recommendation for $6.5 million in general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium to replace court assessment fees of $2.1 million and to provide $4.4 million of additional general fund to support the budget with the corresponding $2.1 million reduction in court administrative assessment revenue, including a technical adjustment to remove remaining court administrative assessment revenue?
Thank you. Before we get to that recommendation to defer this particular item, I do have some questions, and it might be for the agency, but probably also the governor's office. So just more of a comment, because it appears to me that in this committee that the governor's recommendation has created a shortfall of $2.3 million. And I know in this building, we are always trying to find ways to maximize these federal funds. And so it's my understanding, and maybe staff can clarify this, that we have these victims of crime like funds, this act, the VOCA grant, that for every dollar that we're spending on victim services, we're receiving 75% of that back. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure the answer to that question. If you'd like, perhaps the agency would have the answer to that question.
Yes. Is there someone from the agency that might be able to answer that question?
Good morning, Melanie Young, Deputy Administrator for the Division of Child and Family Services. Thank you, Senator Wynn, for the question. In regards to the VOCA grant for every dollar, it's not necessarily 100 or 75% for every dollar, because there are unallowable costs that would not meet the qualifications of that. And so it's a complicated question and answer.
But under the state plan, aren't there certain discretionary rewards that we can pay for victims, including, you know, the sexual assault kits, the forensic medical examinations, helping domestic violence victims relocate, paying for crime scene cleanup for victims of crime, paying for transportation to medical appointments and other things. I'm just going down the list of things that I know are part of the state plan. Paying for childcare due to a disability in order to participate as a victim in these things. I'm just incredibly concerned that we are not, I mean, we have the opportunity to fix this item right now, and the idea that we would defer this knowing we know what the costs are for these victims of crime. And, you know, I think we heard, you know, previously, you know, we're already one of the worst states where we have 3 staff for every 4,634 victims in our state. So that is incredibly low. And I know we have backlogs and people, I'm just wondering why we wouldn't clean this up right now, why we have the opportunity to, especially when, even if it's at 60% or it's at 75%, it seems like we are giving away free money. So I was wondering, you know, where that reduction, how that would inhibit our ability to provide victims with this type of compensation.
Thank you again, Melanie Young, Deputy Administrator, for the record. With this shortfall, I think the only option the state would have would be to amend the state plan to eliminate payments to the victims. And so that would be the only option we would be able to address. We're estimating that a state plan amendment would take anywhere from about 6 to, I'm going to say 9 to 12 months, because it would have to come again before the Interim Finance Committee to approve that state plan. And that would be the only option that we would see to be able to address the shortfall.
Well, that's not an answer that I'd like to hear, that we're amending to get that. I was wondering if we could have someone from the governor's office. It's my understanding, I don't see an amendment coming, but I don't know if something has changed since the last briefing. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Amy Stevenson, Director of the Governor's Finance Office. Right now, currently this account is funded with court assessments, so we do have a budget BDR and policy bill that has not been heard. So we didn't want to replace that court assessment with general fund. So right now we don't have a budget amendment because we are waiting for that legislation.
I think we may have some other questions here. Go ahead, Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you. So I guess just to follow up, and I might have another question for the agency, so sorry. So do you, I understand that bill is still in the works, but is it envisioned that that bill is not just going to take care of the shift in funding source, but also address the shortfall to make sure that we are not cutting benefits to victims of crime?
Thank you for your question. Through you, Madam Chair, to Assemblyman Watt.
Feel free to go direct.
Oh, thank you. Once we figure out what that legislation and that we can actually address the shortfall in the interim is kind of where we were figuring that out. Sorry, I have a long email of this whole.
No problem. I appreciate that. I guess I just echo the concern of the chair in that we're building the budget right now, and I want to make sure that we have a budget that ensures that this isn't a problem and that we don't potentially end up with even greater issues in terms of the plans and things that we're submitting to the federal government and potentially impacting what's available to victims. The question I had that's probably best answered by the agency is, I know that there was some ARPA funds that were transferred to this program in 2022, and so if you could just provide a little bit of background on did we kind of know that those funds were insufficient? Has that been impacted by kind of changes in the federal funding that we got? Kind of how does that fit into the position that we find ourselves in now? So if you could just provide a little background on that.
Thank you, Melanie Young, Deputy Administrator, for the record. So in fiscal year 2022, the program received about $1.4 million in ARPA funds, and those were expended. We only balanced forward into fiscal year 23 about $1 million in reserves. Kind of going back to our previous testimony, in the close of fiscal year 2017, the program had about $12 million in reserves, and we've been expending those down to where we find ourselves in the second year of the biennium being insolvent. And now that we've learned that the federal dollars are that are coming into this program are being reduced further, that's where we're at. So we are currently spending, we have spent the ARPA dollars, and with what's being added and the revision that Ms. Stephenson has talked about that removes the court assessments and adds general fund into this budget, we still find ourselves insolvent in the second year.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And, you know, again, I'm just, I'm really concerned about that. The one other question I have on the federal funds, so I know that there has been some action at the federal level related to some of these funds. Do you have any insight at this point in time if those federal funds may take a bump back up, or do we have any insights on kind of where we think that those federal funding levels may go and how state contribution may affect that?
Melanie Young, Deputy Administrator. For the record, thank you for the question. It's still uncertain where the federal government is going in regards to their funding. Most of the federal funds are supported by federal court assessments, so depending on the outcome of that would help the fund and ultimately come into Nevada. So in regards to the state funds, when we do expend more state dollars, we can tap into, like Senator Wynn was getting to, we can tap into additional federal dollars in this program. And I hope that answers your question. If I have not, please let me know.
It does. Thank you very much for that. And again, the current proposals that we have around spending down the reserves even further, I think, it made sense to spend them down to a certain point. Spending them down further would be fiscally irresponsible and potentially leave us insolvent. And again, I think that reducing the payments, it sounds like the only way to cut costs is to reduce payments to victims of crime, and that is unacceptable to me. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
I have a couple more questions and comments. First, I'll go to Majority Leader Canizaro and then to Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And obviously we've had a lot of conversations about things that are funded with administrative assessments, and if there is that piece of legislation that passes, I want to say it's 448, Senate Bill 448. I could be wrong. But that bill is simply allowing for administrative assessments to go into the general fund. And then we are seeing in other budget decisions, and by way of example, we did a full budget committee closing for the judicial branch, which is largely funded by AAs, to allocate general fund into those, and have made those decisions because those were recommendations that were part of the governor's recommended budget and part of what we are considering in these committees. So it's a little concerning to me to now hear that when we're faced with a shortfall for victims of crime, that because of this AA, we're just not going to address this shortfall. Or that the alternative is that sometime in the interim, we will figure it out. I'm a little uneasy with the fact that we are just not getting a budget amendment when we have made that decision and can make those decisions contingent upon passage and approval of that particular bill, which would obviously change it from the administrative assessments to general fund, and are making those decisions without needing to address something in the interim or without needing to wait and see what happens in that bill. But when it comes to victims of crime, we're just going to make a completely different situation, a completely different decision, and we're not going to see a budget amendment. especially when the alternative, as I understand it from Ms. Finney, is that, or excuse me, from Ms. Young, is that we would have to amend the state plan to stop compensation to victims of crime. That's what I'm hearing today. I have some significant concerns about that because figuring out how we're going to address it in the interim, we know there's a shortfall, and not getting an amendment to address that, I'm just at a little bit of a loss. Sorry, that was maybe more of a comment than an actual question, but.
Thank you. I think we have Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do not have a comment. It is a question. You know, we're only here for 120 days to do the work of the legislative body. And as my colleague had said, we have made some decisions in other budget units that were paid with court assessment fees where we have changed it to general fund because we know that's the direction that this legislative body is going in. Nationally, that's the direction we're going in. We know that there is a shortfall here. It's documented. I think it's disingenuous on our part and probably a slap in the face to the victims of crime to say the only way to take care of this is during the interim when we know that there's a problem now. To depend on a bill that may or may not live. None of us can foretell the future. We have an opportunity to fix this now and do right by our victims of crime in the state, and I think we need to do that now. We only have a few more days left in this legislative session, and if we could get that budget amendment to take care of this now, I believe that's what we should do as a body, especially for this category. Victims of crime deserve the respect of this legislative body, of the Nevada state government, to make sure that we're taking care of them. And the option of cutting benefits to them is just not, that's not an option. Not a question, Madam Chair, just a very strong comment.
Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think we all agree cutting compensation to victims of crime is unacceptable. And we've already talked about the budget amendment, but I was talking to fiscal staff about some other alternatives. And we've done this before, but we have ARPA funds. We have savings on page 19 from, I think it's $11.2 million. Where did I put? $11.2 million to $2 million. I think it was Southern Nevada, the jail. The Las Vegas County Jail. So we have some flexibility in these dollars. I don't know if it has to come through a budget amendment or not, but it's clear that it's unacceptable that we reduce compensation to the victims of crime. We also understand court assessments have been down because of COVID, and they may rebound. Right now, we're expecting a loss of federal dollars, but I think we can solve this and make sure that this budget is not short. We have the resources to be able to do that because of some of the savings. So I agree with my colleagues. It's unacceptable. I would have preferred that there was a budget amendment and some problem solving before we got here. But we do know that we have some buckets of funds that will help us manage this and make sure that we can make this account whole. Thank you.
Speaker Yeager, did you have a comment or question? No. Do we have any other comments or questions regarding this? No, I appreciate that. I completely agree. I think it's clear that this is an unacceptable solution to either cut the state plan and the funding to these victims of crime. Some of our probably our most vulnerable people, women, children, people that have been battered that just want to have any semblance of normalcy, and especially when we have the opportunity to do that. So I would redirect staff to, or I'd accept a motion to redirect staff to bring a recommendation to this when the subcommittee report is presented to the full committee to address this $2.3 million shortfall anticipated over the 2023-2025 biennium with a reduced federal victims compensation formula grant, including looking at those ARPA funds potentially to make up that lack of this. And that would be, I'd accept a motion regarding that. Oh, wait, I think. Go ahead, he's going to.
I think I read the motion. Should I do it again?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and have Chris reread the motion that he previously made before the discussion, just to make it clear.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The decision for the subcommittee. Does the subcommittee wish to defer making a recommendation on the governor's recommendation for $6.5 million in general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium to replace court assessment fees of $2.1 million and to provide $4.4 million of additional general fund to support the budget with a corresponding $2.1 million reduction in court administrative assessment revenue, including a technical adjustment to remove remaining court administrative assessment revenue?
I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any other further discussion? Go ahead, Senator Seavers-Ganser.
Madam Chair, so this motion is using general fund, and I really do think we should be looking at the ARPA fund. Am I misunderstanding that?
Yes, I believe you are. Go ahead and clarify. I'll have staff clarify.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The general fund in the decision unit was prior to this funding shortfall, so that was a separate part of it to replace the court administrative assessments with general fund.
Thank you.
So just, sorry, for the record, Brody Leiser, Fiscal Analysis Division. So we have two issues that are being discussed as part of the consideration. First is the recommendation in the governor's budget to replace the court assessment fee revenues with general fund appropriations. In addition to that, the agency has learned since the time of the budget hearing that there's a shortfall in a federal grant of approximately $2.3 million over the biennium. And so that second piece is what is being discussed and considered to fill that $2.3 million hole with coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds. So as I understand the motion would defer action on both of those items. It would defer action on the replacement of the court assessment fees with general fund appropriations, and also direct staff to bring an option to the full committees when the subcommittee report is presented to fill the $2.3 million hole as a result of the loss of the victims' compensation formula grant funds and replace those with coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the clarification. I'll support the motion.
I know that got very convoluted very quickly. I think there are multiple issues, and hopefully that clarified it. Obviously, it sounds like we do not want to defer this to the interim. We want to address this here today. There are potentially, and since I think it is probably not, we do not want to cut those things, and since an amendment is not forthcoming and we don't want to deal with it during the interim, I think we are looking to see if we can use those ARPA dollars that you had mentioned before that are being unused, and if not, then we would fund this with general funds. But deferring this to give staff the opportunity to look into that to see what other solutions we can come up with, I think kind of summarizes it. But if there isn't any other further discussion on this, did I get a motion? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. The motion carries. And that leads us to our last four. Nope.
We have one
Never
more.
mind. We have one more. I
One
jumped
major
ahead.
closing issue in this budget on page 101. So major closing issue 2 in this budget was the addition of 2 new positions. Governor recommends $242,407, $212,363 general fund to add 1 new crime victim compensation specialist and 1 new administrative assistant 4 to address workload in the Victims of Crime program. The decision for this major closing issue is on page 103. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $242,407, $212,363 general fund, to support 1 crime victim compensation specialist and 1 administrative assistant for the Victims of Crime program as recommended by the governor.
Any questions regarding that recommendation? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously, and now that moves us to our last 4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. These final 4 budgets are staff closed budgets. They have not been heard previously. When I presented the last budget in the group and questions have been addressed, the chair may wish to ask for a single motion for closing consideration on all of the budgets for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing recommendations. So the first of these budgets is the Victims of Domestic Violence budget. There were no major issues in this budget, and there was 1 other item. The second budget is the Juvenile Justice Services budget on page 107 of your packet. There were no major closing issues, and there were 3 other items, and one of these other items is a compensation item that will be deferred to the compensation closing. The next budget is the Nevada Youth Training Center budget, 3259. There are 3 other closing items and 2 technical adjustments recommended. This can be seen on page 109. And the final budget in this group is the Youth Parole Services budget, 3263. There are 5 other closing items, and one of these is compensation related and will be decided at a later date. So on page 113, the decision box can be seen. Fiscal staff recommends that the following budgets be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. 101-3181 HHS DCFS Victims of Domestic Violence, 101-1383 HHS-DCFS Juvenile Justice Services with budget amendment A232291-383 to support a 1 grade increase for the criminal investigator position in this budget to be considered by the committees at a later date. 101-3259 HHS-DCFS Nevada Youth Training Center with 1 technical adjustment, including a reduction of $34,012 in general fund appropriations over the 23 to 25 biennium to correct the agency-specific inflation entries in Decision Unit M101 and approval of Budget Amendment A231183-259 to reduce general fund appropriations by $97,372 over the 23 to 25 biennium to correct a budgeting error in Decision Unit E239 and 101-3263 HHS-DCFS Youth Parole Services with Budget Amendment A232173-263 to support a 1 grade increase for 28 positions, including 17 Youth Parole Counselor 2, 6 Youth Parole Counselor 3, and 5 unit managers in this budget to be considered by the committees at a later date.
Do we have any questions regarding that recommendation? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed say nay. The motion carries, and I thank staff again for their hard work on this. I don't think I've seen so many amendments, and they worked their magic, and that is wonderful. And that ends our budget closings and moves us to our last item on the agenda, which is public comment. I'd ask anyone that wants to testify in public comment to please come up to the front. Remember to say your name and spell it for the record, and I will, you are limited today to 2 minutes in public comment. And remind everyone that you can also put this in writing. If you'd like to call in public comment, that number is listed on the agenda on Nellis for your convenience. And go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Elise Monroy Marsala, Bell's Case Government Affairs. I'm here today for NAMI Nevada. I'd like to thank you on behalf of NAMI today for the recommended investments in the 988 system, as well as crisis services today. Nevada is in dire need of behavioral health infrastructure that can support getting anyone in need connected to high-quality services in a timely manner, but ensuring that people are in crisis are able to get connected to services is of the utmost priority because people are dying waiting for help. So the situation is literally dire. It's clear today, based on the conversations, the questions, and the comments by this body, that funding these services is a priority. So NAMI would just like to say on the record, thank you for your investments.
Good morning. My name is Wendy Garrison, Garrison for the record, and I am the director of China Spring Youth Camp, which is operated under the 9th Judicial District Court in Douglas County, Nevada, under the Honorable Judge Young. He asked me to extend his apologies. He was not able to get out of court today, so otherwise he would have been here. Just a quick introduction. China Springs serves 16 of Nevada's 17 counties. We serve both male and female youth, ages 12 to 18. We provide the youth with stability. Many of these youth have seen no stability in their lives, and we provide it for the first time. We offer 24/7 residential care, education, drug and alcohol counseling, mental health services, case management, cognitive behavioral therapy, and much more. In my estimation, we do this for the cheapest cost to the state of Nevada and to the counties that we serve. China Spring, unlike other facilities, do not have these resources available in our local community. We must provide them in-house, and that is expensive. Now for the good news. China Spring is a very high adherence facility in the state of Nevada, as rated by the legislatively accepted assessment called the Correctional Placement Checklist. In fact, we are the only facility in the state who has achieved this rating. Additionally, when compared nationally to 660 programs, the camp is among the highest in the nation, with the national average being 49, which is low adherence. The camp reached 74.68 in 2022. I have submitted a chart which reflects our dedication to the adherence to evidence-based practices, which have been shown to reduce recidivism. From 2018 to 2022, the camp has improved 28.14 points on these standards. This improvement would not be possible without the dedicated staff at the camp who show up every day and who are committed to helping youth from those Nevada counties. This is despite flat budget cuts which were devastating over the last session of approximately $1.2 million. Everyone is struggling. We understand that. The camp is no exception. But salaries and prices are rising around the country, and yet the camp is stalled. We're stalled with the budget that we are asked to make do. And I appreciate your comments today, and that goes a long way to me being able to go back and support my staff to let them know that we do have support and we are being heard. Here's my request. It's going to be a little different than the number you talked about today, but don't panic. I have an explanation. The camp is $646,645 short for each year of the biennium. We are able to make that balanced budget by holding 9 positions vacant, and still we cannot go to a zero balanced budget. We must balance that against opening fund balance. So I have 2 scenarios to consider. The first is the one that you mentioned today earlier in your hearing, is to return the camp to FY21 funding levels at the state level. That would go a long way to assisting the camp in being whole. That's approximately $696,849. The second, to make up the 249,000 difference, would assist us to also restoring positions that I've had to hold vacant for the last 6 years because the camp has not received an increase in a variety of years in addition to the devastating cuts of last session.
And I'm sorry, I see you have this in writing.
Yes, I do. You want me to stop?
Yes,
Oh,
if you could wrap
absolutely.
it up, and if you do have something in writing, if you could provide it to committee staff, and we'll make sure that we contemplate your comments. And I know that Senator Titus had brought it up earlier, so and hence the reason we have moved this.
Absolutely. I can wrap it up there. I did provide this in writing to your staff. So,
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Do we have any other further public comment here? Oh, thank you. And go ahead and feel free to fill in those seats. And again, I'd remind everyone to limit your public comment to 2 minutes. And please state your name for the record.
My name is Mike Belletti for the record. This is in reference for a request for an increase in Medicaid reimbursements for skilled nursing facilities. I'm executive director at Alpine Skilled Nursing, which is a part of the umbrella of Revive Senior Healthcare. We have over 500 beds for skilled nursing in Reno, which is the most in northern Nevada, and we employ about 400 people. Alpine, like many other nursing homes in Nevada, is facing a severe financial crisis. Medicaid reimbursement rates continue to fall short of our total cost of care, and the shortfall is causing us to operate at a loss each month. Despite our operational costs going up, we have only received 2 rate increases in the last 20 years. Given the rising costs and low reimbursement, in order to stay solvent, we have entertained the idea of converting 1 to 2 of our facilities to Medicare-only facilities. This will result in a loss of significant percentage of the Medicaid beds in northern Nevada, and because we will have less patients, we will need to have less staff, which will result in the loss of jobs for local Nevadans. With the loss of skilled nursing Medicaid beds, the amount of patients who will have to stay in the hospital due to lack of skilled nursing placement will rise dramatically, resulting in less available beds in the hospital and subsequently greater costs to the state due to patients staying longer in the higher acute facilities. Thank you.
I'm Amanda Lawson. I also work at Alpine Skilled Nursing under Revive. I'm the assistant administrator there, or administrator in training. I would like to say that in addition to what Mike said, we are experiencing a significant shortage of caregivers within our healthcare community. We currently have job openings for nearly every frontline position within our facility that we're struggling to fill. Our staffing shortage has been and continues to affect the access of care for those who need it most. Our company has started limiting admissions because we don't have enough caregivers to safely care for more residents, and with that, we're limiting the amount of admissions that we can afford to admit. Therefore, we cannot afford to admit any more Medicaid residents. This greatly impacts our local hospitals that need to discharge patients to us for the patient's recovery. Sadly, we have no choice but to say no to those hospitals. Increasing the Medicaid reimbursement rate will give us the resources we need to hire more staff and ensure that we can continue providing high-quality care that so many Nevada seniors depend on. While we appreciate being included in the governor's budget, the proposed increase is simply not enough. These are our most vulnerable citizens, and they need your help. I respectfully ask that you prioritize our seniors and approve the Medicaid rate increase for the Nevada nursing homes. Thank you.
Chairs Gorlow and Wynn, thank you for having us here. Members of the subcommittees, my name is Brady Flygare, Flygare. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Desert Healthcare Facilities, not-for-profit provider of rural nursing homes and assisted livings in Mesquite, Fallon, and Elko. We currently provide care for 262 residents and employ 343 Nevadans. Today I'm here to request that you approve a significant nursing facility Medicaid rate increase so that we can continue providing quality care for our residents. Rural nursing homes have been especially impacted by staffing shortages and Nevada's chronically low Medicaid reimbursement rates. As you know, nursing homes have experienced an acute workforce crisis. But for rural facilities like mine, licensed caregivers are in even shorter supply. In addition to relying on expensive traveling nurses to provide adequate care, my rural communities are competing with urban area wages to keep licensed staff working local instead of choosing to travel to urban areas for a higher wage. Paying these higher wages and traveling nurse fees have substantially added to our costs without an adequate reimbursement rate. Other costs that we have, such as food, pharmacy, therapy, medical supplies, activity supplies, equipment, insurance, utilities, and transportation have experienced an unprecedented inflation. There's no easy way to put it. My not-for-profit company is spending a significant amount of money each month to provide care in these rural areas, and the shortfall between what it costs to provide care and the amount that we're reimbursed continues to grow. In the past year, all 3 of our locations on several occasions have limited the number of residents because we didn't have enough staff to safely provide care. I'm constantly assessing if it makes sense to continue to pay to keep our doors open in rural Nevada. 2 rate increases in 20 years isn't enough. Chronic Medicaid underfunding for long-term care facilities can't continue. Nevada seniors and caregivers need your support. I respectfully ask that you increase the Medicaid reimbursement rate for our nursing homes. Thank you.
Do we have anyone else here in public comment in Carson City? In Las Vegas, I see some people in the room. Is there anyone that would like to testify in public comment in Las Vegas? Seeing no one coming up to the table, broadcast services, is there anyone on the line to provide public comment? Whew, having a hard time talking today.
If you would like to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Hello, this is Jacob Atwood. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead and state your name for the record and begin when you're ready.
Okay, I apologize. My name is Jacob Atwood. I'm the board chair of the Nevada Healthcare Association and also an administrator at Marquis Centennial Hills, which is a post-hospital rehabilitation and long-term care facility in Las Vegas. In my facility, we have 120 beds, and with our sister facility, we have combined 308 beds. Currently, we have 100 residents at our facility and 150 caregivers. I'm testifying today to ask that you support our seniors and approve an additional Medicaid rate increase for our nursing homes above what's in the governor's budget. The cost of care continues to rise and our facility is facing a difficult financial situation. Operational costs have increased because of the pandemic and record high inflation. Everything from how much it costs to buy gloves to caregiver wages has gone up. Current Medicaid reimbursement rates do not fully cover these costs, and we've only received 2 rate increases in the previous 20 years, which has already been mentioned. Staffing shortages are one of my biggest concerns as a provider, and as we are struggling to hire staff, with low Medicaid reimbursement rates, we do not have the resources to recruit new workers. In my facility, we have 19 open positions currently, but because we're unable to find qualified caregivers, like was already mentioned, we are relying on heavily on expensive staffing agency to cover these vacancies. Over the last year alone, we've used more than 22,500 hours of agency staff, which overinflate our costs. To continue down this path is simply unsustainable for us. Financial and workforce challenges could lead Nevada nursing homes to further limit admissions or close the doors for good. Higher Medicaid reimbursement rates would enable us to invest in our staff and continue to provide high quality care. We are grateful that Governor Lombardo included us in his budget, but I hope that you will approve an additional increase so that we can continue to provide the care that so many seniors need. Thank you.
Do we have any other callers?
The public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
Thank you. And at this time, we will close public comment, and that ends our meeting today. So at this time, meeting adjourned.